Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode. I thought for tonight's episode, I would use the notepad and to attempt to tackle the challenge of wondering how a species can surpass its psychological suffering. And really, I would say the emotional inspiration for this episode was that for a moment I thought about how many different kinds of beings, not just human beings, how many different kinds of beings on this planet have a feeling of being incomplete, and on some level, how many hidden tears have there been on this planet. So, pretty much in this episode, I'm going to see like what can this species do with psychological suffering. Oops. Change the wallpaper here. Okay. Hang on, guys. I need more light here. Okay. Actually, you know what, guys? I'm gonna put the notepad away. Maybe I should just talk this episode. I've been using it too long. Sorry, guys. This was on mute. Okay, instead of restarting this episode, I'll just carry on and you see, reality has an objective position where we're wondering about the past, present, and future of an objective, a physical event. And then there's a subjective dimension where we're wondering about what is going to happen to the idea of the human being. Pretty much what is going to happen to the body of creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere. What is going to happen to the minds of creatures in the middle of nowhere. You know, when we were unconscious creatures, pretty much imagine, whoever you're listening to me, rewind back in your imagination to the point where you can see like the earliest human beings having no sense of subjective identity, no sort of idealistic motivation or inspiration, and they were just creatures that were happening in the world. There is no psychological suffering when one is not aware of the suffering. They say ignorance is bliss because there is no content for there to be a psychological reaction to. So it took us 4.5 billion years just for us to be capable to acknowledge our suffering. That means people may be like, Mr.Within, suffering isn't a good thing, but I'll be like, if you look at it from the past, it's an evolutionary advancement. We evolved not to look at our suffering and be afraid of it, but to become conscious of it. That means as if imagine millions of years of evolution and the person didn't have even a sense of a subjective identity to in some sense bring forth emotions in the mind, or to be conscious of their emotions. I think, a lot of people don't consider how much of what the world means reverse engineers back to how we have perceived the original separation of self and world. This might be a very strange statement, but I feel that the hidden tears of the world, or the hidden tears that the world could not see, can be used. We can recycle emotional suffering through the consciousness of the future to advance humanity. You know, it's as if, like, you see, what does the human being have an abundance of? It has an abundance of an attention to a physical landscape, and it has an abundance of interpretations of this landscape and, in some sense, emotions. Now, granted, it is fair to say that a human being can go through such an intellectual conditioning that, in some sense, they become a sequential, their mind pretty much turns into a sequence divider, right? And the person can stop feeling their feelings, right? There was a time where I noticed this was happening to me through a sort of spiritual context. And I noticed that as my sense of self, through my own selfless activity, began dissolving, it was as if when we know that there is something happening here as an essential part of our intelligence that is not human, the fear of the human idea goes away. What I'm trying to say is that energy doesn't have a face. It doesn't have a shape. Or when I say it doesn't have a shape, I mean it is not bound to its shape. You know, it's like, who would have a more comfortable psychology, an immortal being or a mortal being? If you look at it, it's like the immortal being would go on through like infinite time, not fearing anything because it cannot die. Death is the ultimate fear, by the way. And anybody says otherwise, you know, it's like there's an ignorance there. Death is perhaps the strangest and most bizarre incident or occurrence, right? It's like, you know, a 4.5 billion year potential evaporating like, you know, a drop in the sun. Some part of me has realized that if a person is not grateful for their human archetype psychologically, then they become the unconscious movement of forces. So it's pretty much another way of saying we honor the human idea and we live as it. There's a beauty beyond the veil of our senses. There is something here that has not arrived to suffer, actually, you know. It's as if it's like, you know, the void creating a game. This is the fairest assessment I find. Pretty much a healthy view for everybody to have, that out of nowhere something has appeared. Now, what does this something do? And the moment the species realizes it is the world story where the emotions are arising from, it is a feeling of what needs to happen before nothing can. It's like, on some level, what can I say? We're creatures that are born into a world. Every person is like walking on their own staircase of reality. You know, every person's understanding of the world constitutes of their memory, which is how they have tunneled through past, present moments. And also their ability to fathom the future. In a world where we can see before we move, foolishness is the unconsciousness that is found. The unconscious is not foolish, but I'm saying if a person can see further but they don't, that is like foolishness. If every human being right now listening to me, in your mind, you have a possibility of a more advanced being, more advanced version of everything being. It's like worlds can, unpossess us from fragments, can release us from, I would say, fragments and smaller worlds. We're fragments of a smaller world. You know what? Actually, I don't know that. Let's see. So we have a human being, and the human being basically has a physical body, but the way we know we're a physical body is technically through this mystery of consciousness, a non-physical mind. That means, people, we say that a person's like, people have minds, but the mind is not an object to own, it's a space of intelligent activity. Now, the human being is times 8 billion plus. That means we're reaching that many, you could say, advanced communicators in the world. So technically, to overcome suffering, we must look at the actual real dimensions of this suffering. And the concept of real and reality is a very important one, because that which is real to the mind is very different to that which is real to the body. That means technically imagination is real, but you can't touch it. It doesn't have substance. It's not material. So technically, let's say somebody's sitting in a park and they imagine, for example, like a bird flying by, and put the bird flying in the sky, but there is no bird in the sky. So that act of imagination, technically that person is seeing a bird, but they're not seeing a physical bird. Right? And so technically what I'm trying to say is that we have to, in order to solve this problem of, let's say, global psychological suffering, we have to, instead of just straight up thinking it as an answer, we have to look at the question, and we come to a point where we see the major problems of an individual is based on how an individual is holding themselves as an individual. So we come to the self that he has allowed the world to be. And we come to the definition of the human being, and so it's another way of saying, like, to solve problems, you wonder about the other possible meanings of the problem, So suffering, on some level, we can say it's an unwanted outcome, an unwanted conscious outcome. That means whether the outcome is in the present or if it's something that's going to happen in the future. My personally, I can tell you this is the burden of what comes with being, with living as a futurist. And the burden that comes is that you're going to see certain things that may happen on this planet, and they can be tragic. Right? For example, let's say there's nuclear bombs, and so a person can imagine, oh my God, what if somebody's, right? And it's like 2 buttons will destroy, billions, or 4.5 billion years of progress, or billions of years of progress. So the idea is you can see something happening in the future, and what's fascinating is that a person can have an emotion in accordance to that. Emotions, some of it, they could be from the past, but usually what's going on is that there's the dimension of the body is, wax of the candle flame that is being the consciousness. So pretty much our eyes open in the morning, and we find our physical existence inside the space of our mind, even though we're saying the mind is inside the brain or dependent on the brain's activity first. But in reality, after the brain's activity, it's like the intelligence finds the space to be part of its identity. Like, we don't have language for identifying with space aside from the word being. Right? But really what it is that our body is being in a part of our mind. But when we go into a mode of analysis, or let's say somebody closes their eyes and wonders about the dark beyond the darkness, or wonders about beyond that inner darkness, they will realize that really what it is, it's like proper sequencing. I remember when I was a kid, for some time my family lived in Vancouver. I think I was 7 years old. That's actually where we first went. My family went when I was 7. And I remember with my parents walking beside this kind of beach, like sidewalk, and it was in West Vancouver. And back then there was a building called the Pink Palace. It was just this pink building, with cheap homes, with affordable housing, excuse my language. And what I'm trying to say is that I remember that me and my brother were passing by, and we saw this person balancing these rocks on top of one another, and it went like 11 rocks balanced on top of one another. And believe it or not, sometimes when it comes to the activation of the potential of the human being towards an advanced civilization and advanced humanity, those two words should be divine for all. I would say the idea of the advanced civilization is something that all religious people and all secular people can, in some sense, see it. It is valid in the context of all ideological systems, because all ideological systems consider the future, and the idea of an advanced civilization is the greatest possible future. That is it. If somebody tells me, Mr.Within, why are you alive? I will tell you there's something happening here, and it is moving, it has a momentum, and the activity of human beings, it's like it's on a physical level happening. Somebody can go physically, let's say, it will advance something, but it's also that physical behavior is starting from the mind, and the mind is this mysterious moment of intelligence, which is like like a first person kind of one-sided. It's like they say the eyes are the windows of the soul, and poetically the soul is looking out through the eyes, and what the soul is the original awareness, where consciousness is before it does something to be in a dualistic context. And of course, whoever's listening, keep in mind, I am considering that we're 8 billion, evolutionary creatures in the void, and the true aim of life is not an individual victory. It is the collective victory, the collective possibility of intelligence. The eyes are here to move before time can. That is the power of imagination. A context born out of, the moment's livelihood. Imagination is poetically how the universe is communicating to the self. To continue, my intent is to, attend to the mysteries of the realm when I'm present in the conscious world. Anyways, guys, I'm gonna just try to finish this talk right now. Not finish it right now, but I mean, like, my intention's gonna just be able to talk. But if there's questions relevant to that, I'd appreciate it. And welcome everybody in the chat section. Whatnot. Pretty much, guys, I don't know what it is, but I feel like in this episode, I have to put my ultimate effort to try to see actually what is the greatest strategy and tactics that a species can use to retaliate against its unconscious reaction to the meaningless. It's like our lives are not just the source of meaning, but they are also its future. There's something, it's as if it's a grander event than people have believed. It's like we're a greater civilization than we have accepted. Civilization, I would say the folly of civilization 1.0 is that it didn't believe in itself yet. For me, I constantly think about, okay, there's this I think it's an African proverb, it's an incredible saying where it says if everybody threw their problems, let's say into the same place, right? It's as if, and everybody could see everybody else's problems, they would take their problems back, right? It's like a person could be suffering and they see someone suffering more than them. They're like, oh my God, it's like, how was I suffering? So it's the context, right? And our emotions, they are, what are they? They arise from what we see. They don't say this, but sometimes I was wondering about, like, the concept. I really don't care that much for it, but it's like something where there was a moment, I think, in one of the talks where I was thinking, like, okay, let's say there was this concept of magic in the day, back in the day. What is that magic? And then I realized what it is the same thing Sun Tzu in The Art of War is saying, where he says that the beginning of war is deception, right? Something like that. I mean, back in the day, it was like a savage period. Like, imagine your kingdom's under siege and you're like, oh man, I gotta stop caring for the other side. But what I'm trying to say is that there is a counter force. We can give it different names. The idea of magic was how this counter force arose through language. Do you know? And I'm not kidding. And you could even consider it. Imagine people that they didn't have the sophisticated psychologies they have now. Back in the day, they were just like farmers and just people simple that never considered other dimensions of, let's say, how a human being is being. So it's as if when somebody would come and tell a story, imagine there were no such thing as storytellers back in the day. And I mean, that's kind of impossible to say, but I'm saying it's like what I'm trying to say is language simulates a psychological reality. That's the power of language. And human beings, as much as we want to think that we're free and we have free will, like, who are we kidding? The DNA is a program. We are all genetical programs, which harbor potentials that have somehow found, inner worlds they can walk in before, they manifest and animate in the outer realms. It's as if a person sees how much suffering there is in the world and they start crying. And then they see the suffering in the cosmos and they start crying, right? And they have cried so much, as if imagine an immortal being that decides to cry, right? And it's like till the end of time, tears. And it's as if at some point, the might of the infinite, renounces its suffering because it has already seen it. You see, that's the best thing I could say. Whoever's conscious of their suffering, now you can move beyond it. Right, but if you're not conscious of your suffering, you hide in an emotion. There's something where, I've had, certain nights where it's been like dark nights of the soul. But because it was night, I mean, it couldn't get darker than that. But what I meant was simply that there has been moments where I worshipped my own suffering. I'll be honest, there's been moments where I worshipped my suffering. I allowed my own suffering to define me. But somehow, I don't know if it was I read too many mystical quotes or what happened. But at some point I began questioning who is suffering before accepting my suffering. And really we suffer because there's some part of our psychology that wants to be in control. This is the issue, it's as if like we have huge expectations on freedom and we all want to control, to activate it, to actualize that freedom. But the proper strategy for an advanced civilization is that those who trust their world, they don't have to worry about being a self. Those who distrust their world, it's as if the self plays its games. It's as if, imagine, the person, an immortal being, like, cries so much, there's so many tears that it's like an ocean arises. You could give it a sort of theological poetry and say back in the day, I don't think this is the case, but I would say it could have been possible that like oceans were the tears of God for like, the theological origin of sin. What it is on a purely existential level, we're just this energy. And emotions are a way to tell us how our inner realms and outer realms are synchronized. So if somebody is suffering, that means one of the world behind their eyes and the world in front of their eyes, it's not matching, right? And there's some ways to get out of suffering where you accept the suffering, but there's some ways where you're like, okay, accept it or not, there's something more to the story. It's like anybody who has thought of using a bridge the wrong way, there's more to the story. We don't know what will happen. It's like the mysteries of the world require, the human consciousness to attend. If somebody was truly honest, let's say in a way where it might, overwhelm culture, but mystically speaking, it's actually nothing. Everything is technically being one thing because it's actually being nothing, right? So it's as if nothingness was the divine oneness, as if the authorization of manifestation is beyond the universe, for it comes from God. That there's to be honest, when I wonder about my own emotions on this subject, I realize a part of me is angry with this, just the potential that is not activated. It's like seeing, a great idea, but not seeing the great reality yet. It's as if what pulls us out of the chaos that we self-simulate, it is the ability of vision. How Henry David Thoreau says, it's not what you're looking at that matters, it's what you see. And what you see means it's as if there's a fast, as let's say, poetically, as fast as the speed of light, there is a vision, right? So on some level, all my understandings of what a mind is have come down to this, that it's just the presence of attention, and this attention can move. It's as if, you look at trees and they're like, look at these trees. Even if they were alive, they couldn't move. You look at human beings and you see us physically moving, but when it comes to a multidimensional perspective, we're still living like trees. That means there's greater ways that the mind can acknowledge itself in the moment. Pretty much that's my whole attitude, where I'm like, okay, if the species, it's like, what do we do, not with just the worst case scenario of the species? A lot of people just emotionally react to that. But I would say, what do we do consciously with the best case scenario? And I find that it's like, it would be an allegiance of various forces in the sectors of civilization. It's going to be kind of like the inner realms of civilization. You know what it is? It's as if, like, this is a hilarious thing to say, but it's as if comedians have come to, say to, calm the mind of a species. People don't say this, but I think all these stand-up comics that we see, like on YouTube and whatnot, there's a level of transcendental courage they have. Do you know? It's like there's something there, psychologically. To find humor in chaos, that is kind of like the first step out of hell. What do we do with the idea of an advanced humanity? It's like this is the idea of the advanced civilization. It's the only thing that's like it is. I would honestly say my mind has become restless to it. That means it's as if if before this idea of an advanced civilization, I was like, yeah, it's just some natural event happening, no big deal. After here, like this vision of seeing, I call it civilization 2.0. Is it enough to just die in the void? Through the acknowledgement of the dimensions of the human being. Pretty much, I think it's pretty much like this is, I think, how if this was like, let's say, civilization was a sort of chess game against time, it would be as if like the moves I see civilization making towards an advanced civilization to overcome its unnecessary psychological suffering is realizing that the mind has an ability to provide different angles to the objective existence. It's another way of saying our mind releases our body because it sees probabilities. It can see different ways of it moving. Right now I could raise my hand in the air, I could move it left, move it right. It's as if that's the freedom that comes with being a conscious mind in the realm you can move behind your eyes as well. Now, if we were to wonder about the evolution of like what would be the best case scenario or potential best case scenario of how objects are changing in the void and how subjects are being witnessed by an unknown factor, right? And so the idea would be as if like we realize if we have faith in the world, we have faith in all that is being the world. If we trust the world, that means the whole cosmos. Imagine somebody, had the confidence because they trusted themselves. It's like, oh, great. It's like, but what about the confidence that comes from trusting the world? There's something there, guys. You become a different human being. Humanity becomes the greatest home, Because what can we do? We live like unconscious animals, or we are the evolution of conscious stability. Something has to be done with what we are being has a potential. So it's as if like imagine somebody who suffered in the past and they're suffering in the present. Okay, imagine a human being's like, man, I suffered in the past. I'm suffering right now. It's like, oh my God, everywhere I look, there's suffering. What do I do? It's like, oh my God, could God be suffering? Could the world be suffering? Could every archetype my mind has ever known be suffering? It's like the idea can multiply. It's like, I would say fear is like a fire. It can make you doubt everything, really. beyond the meaning that is generated by the story, by the brain's storytelling engine. I find that through a simplicity of accepting the whole moment, that means I think this is the most street smart approach, you know, to truth. Where you're like, okay, if I want to know truth, I don't want to just know the truth of my own individualized perception. I want to know the truth of the whole moment. If we want to know the truth of the moment, we can't be our individualized perception. That is pretty much this, not, I would say, it's kind of naturalistic as much as theological. I would say it's like when we reach a portal, the person has to leave behind their old world. The caterpillar has to leave behind the life of a caterpillar to experience the life of a butterfly, right? And so whatever angle of approach we have, it's as if like the past suffering is there, the present suffering is there, and the future potential of no suffering is like the savior. You know, the person's going through something, it's like, okay, you know, it's like, you know, it's like the future's still left, you know. You know, imagine in the future, you know, an extraterrestrial comes on a podcast and there's like the interviewer asks so many questions, you know, and then the extraterrestrial's like, okay, can I ask you a question? And then the, you know, the podcaster, the interviewer's like, yeah, sure, extraterrestrial from another from another universe, of course you can ask another question. And the extraterrestrial says, you know, how are you guys not afraid of your existence? Right. And imagine that podcaster turns to that alien or whatever. And that would be technically a podcast broadcasted to, you know, to the whole cosmos. You know? It's like broadcasted, you know, from the Milky Way galaxy. We gotta honestly change the name of Milky Way, you know. I think if we turn it to the Human Way Galaxy, it makes sense. You know, we put the word human in our galaxy, you know. You know, it's like to answer this problem of overcoming suffering. It's pretty much like saying, like, how do we view everything? And so the answer, I would say, to that, let's say, extraterrestrial podcast, that an answer would be as if, you know, we accepted the unknown rather than fearing it. We opened up the possibility that, imagine in this universal sector, our species is going as if we are living in accordance to, you know, the honesty of our own advancement. And it's as if we are to see our greater dimensions, the species will honestly go there. That means we will be the greatest of our own dimension, and then we walk into other dimensions, right? I think this is what the samurai strangely understood, but they had a very kind of savage way of going about it. I think what is missing from the modern world is collective honor. And because we don't have honor, its suffering can define us. It's like lesser ideas will define you if you don't have a greater one. You know, the mind is here to provide a roadmap for the body, you know. I've heard some people say like holy books are like instruction booklets on human life. But I would tell you that our mind is being the map maker. So much of human meaning is brain simulation. Like, it's bizarre, right? And when we wonder about, okay, what is knowing of its continuity? That means when we sleep and we wake up, why is it that it's like we remember yesterday? Like, memory is kind of bizarre. Memory is kind of like it's like one foot of the species is still in the past, and the future is like the other foot's out of the door. You know, I think sometimes, you know, people may listen to this episode, you know, let's say people will listen to the episode and be like, what is this guy talking about? And I'll be like, exactly, it's unknown. All right. I don't know. I think every person deep down has an emotional relationship with all of manifestation where they know whether they can trust their intuition or not. You know, the human intelligence is, even though the brain thinks it is alone, but it cannot be. You know, if life was, you know, let's say there was it's like life is not a solipsistic perfection. It's as if, you know, rather than, let's say, somebody playing a video game and that video game character is just alone in a map, right? And now imagine that video game character is in a multi-dimensional, multiplayer online game, right? And so existence is the multiplayer online game, but our own ability to think and fathom and have moments of inner vision of inner sight, you know. To me, that is really what thinking evolved to. I realize all language, if it's to be properly remembered, it must become, in some sense, a film. People remember films very easily, right? But they don't remember, you know, let's say, you know, paragraphs. You know, honor is another way of saying there's still something for consciousness to hold on to. Right now, consciousness has held on to the idea of the individual human. I would say maybe 2022 is the most intense time where there's, you know, the largest, the most, let's say the most amount of people. Not the most, but like for our time, it's like where people are worshiping the individual. You just see it being children being conditioned into this. children have posters, right? Like, I remember actually the posters I had, it was just like from one video game character, you know. Something that people may not know about me. There was this, when I was younger, there was this video game called Prince of Persia, and I would play this Prince of Persia 2, and it was called actually Warrior Within hilariously. So I remember I was playing this game on the computer, and I would keep going further and further in the game, and either my brother would come and delete the game or my mother would come and delete the game. Do you know? And I remember I had tried that game so many times where it was as if I was like, man, it's like the joy is being destroyed, you know. And so eventually though I complete the game. And I remember like that moment where it was like, it's like, how would I tell you? It's kind of like our psychologies are trying to prove something to themselves to exist. And at the same time, after they prove to themselves that they exist, like the moment it clarifies its own or confirms its own position, then all the different positions arise with everything else. You know, I would say it's kind of like, it's like a journey, you know, it's kind of like poetically attention is sculpting, you know, life out of the meaning of the movement in itself. So, where this leads, it's like, okay, it's no longer human beings psychologically suffering. Oh my God, how sad. It's like, okay, every person is a multidimensional being. Every person has an inner realm and an outer realm. And it's like every let's say poverty-stricken country, you know, countries where it's like life is so incredibly hard that it's like unfathomable to modernity, right? And it's as if even if you are in the worst case scenario, your mind's life still exists, right? It's as if your mind it's like free movement. Let's say if somebody doesn't have energy to physically move, but they could have that same amount of energy for movement, it could also be internally used double amounts, right? So it's like, so what I'm trying to say is like, it's easier to move our attention in our inner realms than it's actually faster in our inner realms than it is in the outer realms. That means a person can see in their inner realms their hand grabbing a cup, and then their physical hand follows that inner realm. You know? The question becomes how 8 billion, it's not 8 billion just human beings, it's 8 billion multidimensional beings, and suffering is allowed to be viewed through a multidimensional context, right? It's like when somebody is trying to solve a problem, they just accept how the problem looks like, or there's some people who test the problem to see if the problem actually exists before seeking an answer. Right. It's as if like we see usually in media that the secular mind, for example, let's say I've seen these like, you know, kind of battlefield like, you know, discussion debates between theists and atheists on YouTube. And it was as if like one is so easily breaking and the other is so easily allowing itself to be broken. It's hilarious, you know. But it's kind of like this notion, I don't know how to say it. We cannot ignore the possibility that life has efficient implications. It's more than just acknowledgement of the void, oneness, and duality from that state. You know, there's something else. There's something that doesn't have a big, if it was a riddle, mystical riddle, I'd say, it's like, what is that thing that doesn't have a beginning or an end, but is everywhere? And we all know the answer: space. Our mind is our life as space. Our body is our life as matter. So every person, your body is in your mind. Your mind is under the governance, and most initially through your eyes. So right now, if I was to just say like how many dimensions I'm seeing in the current conscious moment I'm experiencing, it's as if my attention initially is like beaming out of my eyes, right? So my attention is focused out of my eyes, but all the other senses are there too. But it's my engagement with what I see that allows the other senses to animate the rest. You know, if the species fails, we are all fools. If there was something better we could all do and we didn't do it, it's like we were foolish. So it's as if the species is in its acceptance of suffering is being a fool to the potential of the world. The idea is that what would a world where human beings are already free and at peace look like? And if our inner realms can access that, then you would be, in some sense, living behind your eyes in a more advanced world than you're actually physically moving in front of your eyes. And it's really, how things that are, it's like how Carl Jung says it actually. He says, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The whole point of human life is to use consciousness and to realize and be grateful for this evolutionary utility of it. It's like, okay, it's like, right now I'm being, let's say you're this honest philosopher who's like, okay, I don't know if I'm a physical being or a non-physical being. I just don't know. Imagine you're an agnostic, emotional agnostic, It's like, I think most agnostics are like, uh, stop shouting at me, everybody. Both the theist and atheist are shouting at the agnostic. It's like, choose a side, weakling. But what it is that if we allow the world to be unknown, we allow our intelligence to view before definition. This is the power that is found. It's kind of like a energy source where once you realize how instantaneously you're being, everything, every act of the mind becomes additional. So what I mean by this is like, usually for myself, at least the way I'm experiencing my mind, I have no thoughts. Even when I wake up, there isn't thoughts. There's inner visions. There's emotions slightly being like thoughts, right? As if I already know how to move. But it's like, imagine like existential muscle memory. And so at the same time, there is no thought. And as I go about the day, the thoughts emerge. Not just based on my physical change of location, but also based on just every view, how my attention moves, right? And if we have, let's say humility that, all right, it's unknown, we don't know it, then there's an instantaneous contentment. And to be, it's kind of like, what's the best thing to master? And it's strangely how we're experiencing our existence. This is the greatest master. Even Lao Tzu says it, you know. He says, mastering others is strength, mastering yourself is true power. And to master yourself is another way of saying, how's your attention being used? You know, a person can have any opinion, but their opinion is instantly silenced by how big this world is and all the possibilities of manifestation there exist in it. It's as if after some point you can't judge, compare, or hate. Why? Because the world is bigger than our beliefs on it. In the chat section, somebody asked the question, how to understand one's attention. It's not something to understand conceptually, or at best conceptually, if you're a playful being, it's poetry for you. But it's not an idea. That means it's like to understand attention is another way of saying, how's the attention being the you that's trying to understand? It's another way of saying pre-thought state of being before you do anything. That's it. It's instant acknowledgement. It's kind of like, you know, a person stays in the sauna as much as they need to, you know. It's as if, like, you know, it's like there isn't an ego behind, like, yogis being like, I'm gonna go meditate in a cave, like, you know, 10 years more than you did. It's like, it's not one of those things, right? It's that it's like there's a universal intelligence here, and those human beings who notice beyond the idea of the human, imagination opens up for them. So what I'm trying to tell you is that it's like all the secret teachings that one looks in the outer realms, they are actually in the origin. That means we're looking at the effect of something and being like, what does it mean? But the yogis were like, go to the cause. So to understand one's attention is wondering about what is causing me being right now. You know, it's like the mysteries of your own eyes revealed, but only by your own command. And when I say your own command, I mean it's like when you realize this is in the Bhagavad Gita, it explains this incredibly. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says that there is a self with a capital S, and there is a smaller self without a capital S, and that smaller self without the capital S is another way of saying the smaller self is, what do you call it? Your senses, your memory, and let's say abstraction. Your greater self is not an idea. Just take that in if you're listening. Right now, I'm pretty much making this bold statement of saying we have never been an idea. Ideas come and go. So if we ideologically try to understand something when ideas come and go, it would be as if till the end of time You know, it's like what you see. It's pretty much like an endless update when it comes to conceptual truth. And for me, when I realize this, my effort in these talks is that it's like philosophers in the future generations, they have to, in some sense, outdo what I did. Pretty much that's the incredible hidden logos behind that is moving philosophy in this realm. Let me tell you what it is. Philosophers have an honor. I would say this is kind of like not just the inspiration of culture, treating philosophers as insignificant, but it's just that every philosopher is trying to share how far the attention has gone in the realm. That's the power of philosophy. It's like we're trying to honor each other's eyes at the same time see beyond each other. Because it's as if like everybody is drawn innately by advancement because the idea exists within themselves in the first place. To remember that we are advanced beings and the void is another way of saying the void was never the void. Alan Watts has this thing where he says, imagine waking up having never gone to sleep. Just that ability to just fathom, could it be that what is looking through our eyes can not go anywhere? Or I should say differently, it cannot change. It's like a changeless viewer of a changing universe. That's really, I think, where the freedom of imagination comes from. What can I say to a species in which its eyes are open in the void? Seek a freedom beyond words, to wonder about states of being, regardless of how the past is spoken and how the present shouts. The mind of every human being is like more advanced than the greatest telescopes because it creates worlds as much as it looks into them. Psychological suffering is held in a certain position, based on the acceptance of how one is a shape in a changing world. It's hilarious. The emotions interpret reality as poetry. The intellect interprets reality as analysis, as a sequence, pretty much. Really, what logic is actually a sequential honor. A sort of sequential honoring. The human mind is so incredible that the moment it conquered its past and the moment it conquered the present, suddenly what became paradise was the greatness of its own design. There's a type of greatness where somebody, let's say, finds greatness, and then there's a type of greatness where somebody realizes every moment of their life was a sort of, the brilliance of how a universe was happening, sort of. It's like the universe is breathing beyond our eyes. Greater dimensions watch the greatness of mankind. They guard it, it's as if, like, I don't know what it is. I think, like, just the moment human beings had an ability to fathom this notion of greatness, it's pretty much like the advancing by looking at advancement. Mankind is welcomed by all dimensions in this realm because mankind is superior beyond the thoughts that define the dimensions. There's an outer silence and there's an inner silence. In the outer realms, I would say outer silence is very obvious. Inner silence is when you realize your attention cannot be a shape. That consciousness is like the glow of a candle in the darkness. And the idea is that if there's a better way for all of life to happen, it should be attempted. I mean, what else can we say to suffering? It's like we either believe in it or we wonder if there's something wrong, right? And what is honesty but one seeking or realizing they are already being their original nature? It's as if we are not true, how can we find truth? If we don't consider a truth to the original of the human being, not the human idea. Right now what's happened is that again, going back to this example of atheists debating theists, it's like the atheist shouts at the theist, the idea of God is fiction and non-fiction, wake up human being, and then the theist, which I have never seen them say it in this way, but it's like you could see like the sort of equivalent theist argument being like, you don't believe in the idea of God, I don't believe in the idea of self, because that is the end. I shouldn't say the end, but that is the road of the religious person. I was privileged to be able to see both sides of the coin. I would say I am one of those individuals who experienced living in a theocracy, and then had the privilege and the blessing of moving towards a sort of artificial but still democracy. see, freedom is very important because we're temporary beings and life needs to be activated, you know. When we reach a point in history where the leaders of nations are like, oh my God, what have we been doing this whole time with our egoic games? There's a species here that can be very advanced and it's suffering, right? That means it's as if, like, you know, a lot of people, you know, it's like, you know, any person you look at long enough, you'll see your shadow in them, pretty much. But it's as if we need the kindest person on the planet to go speak to the most powerful people on the planet and be like, relax. You know, it's like it's all about how do we advance a species before it goes extinct. Like the picture is way bigger than somebody in a lifetime feeling powerful. We're wondering about the strategy of lifetimes. You know, the strategy of as far as the natural being is going to endure before interferences from either cyberspace or other world. Before interference from other worlds, right? There's something here that has an ability, right? It's like it's like if the future could look at us now poetically, they'd be like, you guys don't realize what you can do, and you're not doing it because fear has convinced you of your inability. You know, it's like life is this kind of like, you know, obstacle course where the person has to not just live through the synchronization of their inner realm and outer realm, but it's another way of saying, like, where is it going? Where is existence going? You know, and why is the world being recycled all the time? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, how many types of civilizations have emerged, and if we had a sort of, like, we have reached the level of human consciousness right now where we can have enough decency as a species to be like, okay, let's see a bigger picture. You know, for me, the strategy, it's like we have to start honoring an interstellar and galactic scenario in all of our cultures, you know? You know, parents should tell science fiction bedtime stories to their children, you know, not like, you know, like, I have this view that if a child sees complexity and not through fear, but through love, that child will wonder about that complexity, because the idea is that anything we trust, we engage. Anything we distrust, we, in some sense, the true self hides behind its eyes because it fears what it can be in front of it. You know? It's like we don't have time to suffer. This is like my strategy to the species. I'm like, we see something more advanced. We require the greatest symphony of human ability to be played on this planet. How do we go about this, right? And to me, it's as if like I was like, okay, you either change 8 billion individuals individually, or you try to change the ethos. And the ethos is another way of saying, what story are all these creatures in the middle of nowhere saying to themselves, right? Even if we fear the unknown, we dislike nothingness. But in reality, nothingness is like the blank page, you know? It's, imagine a writer has writer's block and they're like, I don't know what else to think, right? All they have to do is just stop being a writer. And instantly the writer's block goes away, because the idea is that it's like there's a context of freedom where consciousness emerges through. Or maybe a better word for it would be subtext. Like, for example, when you see actors on set, right? The actor, if it's a great actor, it has already understood the subtext the director intends for the scene, right? So the actor goes in front of the camera and in some sense actualizes. In some sense, it's like it comes into the scene as if it's already that character living in that world. You know, some level, when you look at the past, you become grateful. And when a person looks at the future, usually, what is it they resent, right? Resentment doesn't only come from the past. Somebody can resent the future. Somebody could right now think that human beings are inevitably, they don't deserve to exist, for example. Right? Like that was the whole kind of anarchy model we see, right? An ideology where anarchy is like, why should I care? You know, it's as if my freedom is more important than everyone's freedom, why should I care? Right? And this has been pretty much the power games of culture, but of cultures throughout history. But I would say right now we have an opportunity as 8 billion human beings, even though every person's identifying with the jersey of their nation and whatnot, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm like, we can, rather than getting rid of nationalism, we can add an additional dimension. And we can in some sense say that it's as if all nations are part of a global civilization. To me, the idea of civilization is a greater unifying factor than just like identifying with, colors on chunks of land, colored chunks of land, like that's national. The idea is nationalism, when it appreciates its humanism, brings forth its advanced humanism. Right? Advanced humanism means that we honor the idea of the natural human being, and simultaneously we march into the unknown future, going through whatever sort of revelation awaits. So in some sense, imagine you're a general on a battlefield, and you're seeing that it's like some sort of mistaken inefficiency has happened in it. Okay, so this is a good example. Let's say, let's bring in like the movie Gladiator, okay? And so, okay, not the movie Gladiator, but let's say some sort of setting like that, and there's some general on the battlefield, or let's say even Sun Tzu, but whatever, like some general on a battlefield, okay? And this general on a battlefield has the commanding officers below, and below the commanding officers are all the soldiers that are listening. And so imagine some tactic, and what is a tactic? Tactics like how the strategy is going to move, how it's going to actually happen. So in some part of how the strategy of this general is happening, what ends up happening is that a tactic inefficiently goes forth, and the general now has a choice of being like, should I let that moment of inefficiency stay? Or should I, in some sense, take that inefficiency and make it an efficiency? Or should I add another dimension to see what other ways the problem can move before a person tries to solve it, right? So what I'm saying, it's like that general that sees like the front lines in something inefficient going on, he himself instantly goes there. Or I should say instantly, but it's as if like he instantly senses a force behind the inefficiency. So it's like this, it's like a proverb can come from this. It's like behind every inefficiency, an inefficiency is guiding. An inefficiency is pushing. Behind every inefficiency, an efficiency moves it. I think that's better. It's just trying to get 8 billion creatures to wonder what an advanced humanity looks like, an advanced civilization looks like. And I think that will solve all of the psychological suffering, because the psychological suffering is occupying attention more than the person being upset about the ideas of their mind. They have to, or the ideas they have, or the view they have on themselves, right? The person has to be, it's like, what else is there? By making the context free, we allow the concept to move in a new way. So some people can be suffering because they're looking at, like, imagine somebody's behaving very, you see this in movies, right? Like even in the movie Matrix, right? Kind of like a sort of artificial life and waking up beyond it. Imagine life was a video game, and it was as if there were three levels to it. And imagine a person physically existing. It's as if they existed, let's say, for some time on this earth, and suddenly popped up in the screen of their vision, right? It's as if level achieved, as if you lived as a physical entity, right? And imagine there was a level of the mind, and the person lived as a mind, and in some sense, it's like level achieved. And then imagine after the body and the mind, the person, there's another level, and let's say that's an unknown level or a bonus level or an inconceivable level, right? And so it's as if it's like beyond the life, or it's another way of saying what is life doing with objects and subjects as it is being its future. If the future and past are considered as just like emanations of a singular present, right? That could be like one approach. Another approach could be that the future is a living event, like the future is alive, but it's not alive in the dimension we're in. It's like, let's say Edison had the idea of the light bulb. He saw the light bulb go off in his mind. The light bulb existed in his mind, but he had to invent it in the outer realms, right? And there's something about shamanism where it's like an old school shaman practice. It's like the shaman get a bowl with, like, I don't know, like a feather, like dried fruit, like, a rock, a bone or something in there, right? A bunch of stuff in this bowl, and the shaman back in the day, like primitive shaman, would throw all the stuff in the bowl on the ground, and the way they were stationed, the shaman would instantly look at it, and the first thought that would come to the mind of the shaman was like how the locals had spoken, how the spirit of nature, had communicated to the body, physically, to the manifest entity. So they would pretty much get this ritual ready. They would do the ritual, but the whole point of the ritual was that they were trusting how they were doing that unknown act. Okay? And so the first idea that would come to their mind when they saw that stuff on the ground was like the sort of, let's say, trustable revelation or trustable content of the mind, So they had that attitude. But now imagine a person didn't need a bowl with a bunch of stuff, and they looked at every moment of their life. They have been the observer of all the dimensions that they have been experiencing in existence. There is the unconscious, as Carl Jung says, but the unconscious exists to the conscious. If we're being something beyond a condition-based attention, then it's like we could technically be what we're looking for, I think what it is that the massive emptiness of outer space has just made us fear the world before trusting it. I feel that we are ultimately creatures of attention before we're creatures of language, or the movement of a creature in language. Kind of being an ideal of being the idea of a human being is kind of like, stepping into like an Iron Man suit or a giant robot, It's like, could 8 billion human beings find within themselves a way to look at the world? That greatness had no obstacle. It's like instant coffee, now we want instant truth. when your eyes become, when your sight becomes your teacher, that's beyond this sort of, it's like there's enlightened, sure, there's enlightened gurus in the outer realms, but it's like that which is moving your inner realms is beyond what language can say. And the idea is that the psychological suffering of the species is unnecessary, where in that domain of that psychology, as a reality without the suffering is accessible. It's kind of like the practice in the medical field where in some sense the doctor is like, the ability to attend to life is more than it's just, it's like the context is the lift-off platform for the concept. But what the context is the overall view value of it. Really, we can drown, let's say, in the ocean of our tears, realize that it's like tears will come and go, and laughter will come and go, and the idea is, how can we go beyond how we have been behaving in the past, right? It's as if like a person's like, I'm not behaving like my ancestors, right? I am like the future of my ancestors, so technically it's kind of like another way of saying the future's not going to be behaving like us, or it's not going to even be like a psychological position like us. I have this feeling that pretty much there's the distrust of human beings, of the world they're in, has allowed for the future generations to achieve that trusting archetype. It's another way of saying to trust the world when it moves beyond. Honestly, guys, water is also a huge problem that needs to be solved on the planet. I think if sea life could talk, it'd be like, please use a trash can during the race. If animals could talk, they'd probably tell human beings to go live in outer space. Anyways, guys, pretty much, final thing to say about hidden tears the world could not see is that we just have to start cultivating compassion and honor for our position in a civilization. It's like it's a multiplayer online game. And if the characters don't honor the multiplayer online game, it's like, why is that world here? Right? And we've reached that interesting point in human history where our minds are moving faster than our bodies, and the choice of the future is going to be either like our body is automated, right? Or in some sense, we consciously still move through it. That means we have to give such a grand purpose to the human being so that it stays as a physical being in order to, in some sense, have a sort of balanced survival. For me, it's like this realization of, oh my God, what's beyond the human being? And then realizing the human being is that. It's a round circle. It's as if what wasn't fascinating becomes fascinating when you realize how unknown everything is. It's as if, like, it's like this podcast is being broadcasted, from the unknown to the unknown. Or from the unknown and the unknown. It's just like 100% there's better ways. Just like a person, let's say, tries to cook something, and they're like, there's 100% a person on this planet who's cooking this food better than me. could cook the exact same food better than me. Similarly, it's like all human beings being like, there's definitely a better way our species and civilization can be coordinated or orchestrated towards the greater melody of the future. For me, if my preference is like, I like the idea of royalty. That means if there was a king back in the day, I would probably serve that dude. But I would say like the idea is it's like the king of the human kingdom is the future generations, and the crown can never be on the head of a physical human being. It's on the head of the future. It's as if we're all serving the future kingdom. Why? Because what else can we do? It's like we live our lives and we stop existing, or our lives had some sort of influential power over the stream. It's as if it's like, did we add energy to the human effort, or did we take away energy from it? I would say that would become like the sort of justice system. In an advanced civilization, the way I have fathomed its potential morality is that its morality is just going to be based on efficiency and inefficiency. So inefficiency is violence. Why? Because we have minds. Ever since we started wearing clothing and named ourselves and put on hats, it's like we became something that was never an animal to itself. Pretty much what I'm saying is that the suffering is the exoteric dimension. It's what we see on the outside surface. And the potential of life is an esoteric dimension. It's in the essence, So somebody who believes in their own suffering is like somebody who has accepted the whole ocean. It's just the surface of the ocean they see. Sometimes man can, the attention can be like, if let's say there's three different, okay, let's say there's person A, person B, and person C. And we look at how person A moves, and person A moves, let's say, as if like he's influenced by the past. So person A moves, let's say, from our view of the past. Or let's say person C moves from the view of the past. Or let's say person A moves from the view of the past. We look at person B, and person B is moving from just the present. That means it's like you're pretty much seeing like three people, three creatures moving, three human entities moving, right? And we're wondering, okay, what is motivating their intelligence? And it's either something they have concluded from the past, or it's a response to something that's happening in the present, or it's something they see in the future. Like when you look at street smart people in bazaars, they're street smart. Why? Because they're just caring about the future of the event rather than its content, And really, how do I say this? It's like we are so advanced that fear, that is the attention that would go to fear, not that we should ignore fear, but I'm saying it's like we won't succumb to it. We would realize there's something bigger happening. There's something bigger than our fears. There's something bigger than our suffering. And only in moments of conscious joy or such ananda, conscious existence, in some sense being conscious of existence, you suddenly experience the bliss of all that is even moving at all. Right? It's as if the person was looking for divinity, not realizing they were moving in the middle of nowhere. Anyways, guys, care for an advanced humanity. It'll not just cheer you off, but it will also remind you that it's like if we're inside a multiplayer online game, we might as well play it incredibly. We might as well wonder about the greatest possibility of something. And there's so much, and this is why humility is important, because the person's being honest with what they don't know. it's hilarious. It's kind of like, is the unknown possessing man? Is the unknown possessing knowledge, or is knowledge possessing the unknown? And I would say in 2022, 100% it's knowledge possessing the unknown. Or I should use a different verb. I should say it's either the unknown moving the known, or the known moving the unknown. Mysticism is trying to really go towards that tunnel of like, okay, well, how is my life being unknown? Like, it's like, what do I do with the unknown variables of my life? And the other side is like, what do I do with the known variables? Every moment is a teacher in disguise of how our karma happens. We are being the greatest teaching. And I would say honestly, the moment a species is conscious of its advanced potential, we will be honored in all dimensions of being. The moment just the effort towards advancement is there, I will tell you, an honor of all dimensions comes. Not an egoic honor because of a condition we're being honored. We're being honored by how instantly we realize the unconditional. Pretty much what the game of, imagine like how many different galaxies there are in the world, and imagine how many different planets have like species on them who are trying to build advanced civilizations. It's like pretty much the game of planets and advanced civilization. And so it would be as if we would be one of the most greatest ways that it's happening, right? Because our species experienced the inefficiency first, right? It's like it's not like we're kind of like we start off as an old person and we get younger, and then we stop existing. Imagine it's like as you get older, you're constantly becoming healthier, like Benjamin Button, archetypal style. So it would be something where how would I say it? There's other possibilities if the moment has moved in one way. If there's enough space for it to move another way, it can exist also. We have reached a time where I would classify human beings. They became the advanced sapien. We evolved from the human being to the presence of an advanced being. We're all on this, giant boat called the planet. And so the idea is that it's time to like have interstellar goals, I'm not saying all children should be astronauts, but we should think about how much we can advance any system we're conscious of. There's joy in that, by the way. There's a quote I'll share from Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. He says, "The mind covers up reality without knowing it. To know the nature of the mind, you need intelligence, the capacity to look at the mind in silent and dispassionate awareness." And post that, it's like after you have seen the most, heard the most advanced silence and stillness, let's say you've experienced that. You've experienced the most advanced silence and stillness, only the most advanced movement and noise is left. Because how far is our freedom? Sri Sargodat Maharaj says, a quiet mind is all you need. All else will happen rightly once your mind is quiet. As the sun on rising makes the world active, so does self-awareness affect changes in the mind. In the light of calm and steady self-awareness, inner energies wake up and work miracles without effort on your part. Yeah, it's another way of saying, just like soccer players trust each other in a team, it's like you trust the world that your eyes are in. It's magnificent because it has never happened before. That means it's like before I gave this talk had never happened before. It's like that inner realm content had never made it to that until it was. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says awareness is ever there, it need not be realized. Open the shutter of the mind and it will be flooded with light. Wow. The fascination, honestly, guys, for true nature or true ability as a species, that's like, what's going to become the guardians of the future. It's from those kind of states of mind, right, where it's like the future has become the most important thing the past could look at. A species, imagine this is when an advanced civilization happens, when we can honor the past, honor the present, and honor the future. Then an advanced kind of global mind sphere will take place. We serve the body of civilization, we serve the mind of civilization, and poetically we become the soul of civilization, the final act. It's like the finale of the finite was a remembrance of infinite. That means right now we're just fearing or loving a temporary finite universe. But imagine on the other side of the coin, it's infinite, and you surpass the fears and love, the fear and love of the infinite. That means you go beyond, an infinite geometrical continuity. And you find an instant peace. This instant peace is enough to allow your world to glow again differently. I hope this episode was helpful. Much blessings on us.